Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my pleasure to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on the economic recovery of tourism and indeed on the future of tourism. Let me start off by saying that I believe that tourism has a bright future. And I think that the tourism industry globally, though it has been shaken in the short term, I think in the long term, it will be a much stronger, a much more resilient, more sustainable, greener, and inclusive, and of course, profitable industry. The Caribbean is the most tourism-dependent region. And this is by the IADB's Index of Dependency. And we can see why, because for the Caribbean region, tourism generated 2.8 million jobs, which is approximately 15.2% of employment in the region. It contributed approximately $60 billion to GDP, which is about 14% of the region's GDP. And visitors spent approximately $36 billion, which is equivalent to about 20% of exports from the region. So tourism means a lot to Jamaica. It means a lot to the region. During the pandemic, tourism, though there was a massive fall-off, the recovery in tourism, in Jamaica in particular, was actually significant in leading the general recovery of the economy. But I think there are some things that the pandemic would have taught us, not just the region, but globally. One, there needs to be stronger partnership between governments and private sector partners in tourism to plan and manage crisis. In our region, in the Jamaican example, in the initial stages, players were not quite certain what to expect. There was an immediate fall-off. But our government took a very proactive approach. We engaged the sector, and we put in place a program to ensure that we could support employees in the tourism sector. So even though visitor arrival fell dramatically, in some instances to zero, we still managed to cushion our tourism workers. And that was very important, to still keep them in tourism so that at the point of recovery, you're not struggling to find your workers to come back into the hotels. So I think going forward, a stronger approach in having a plan to ensure the resilience of the industry, both from a human resource management point of view, from a public health point of view, and indeed to treat with any other form of crisis that may emerge, would be an important lesson to securing that bright future for tourism. Stronger coordination, stronger partnership. In Jamaica's case, this stronger partnership, stronger coordination emerged into what we call the resilient corridor. By the nature of Jamaica's tourism, we were able, during the pandemic, to put in special rules, even during lockdown periods, that allowed our tourism industry to operate, to recover, and even expand. And so I thought that I would point this out to this audience, that special relationships, special measures, a special regulatory framework work very well for Jamaica between the government and the industry in ensuring that our industry could recover. But we also hit upon some problems, particularly in dealing regionally. For example, setting standards for cruise ship arrivals. Different regions had different standards, which made it very difficult for cruise ships to navigate within the region. And so there has to be greater coordination amongst governments in the region about how they're going to treat with crises, the standards that they're going to set, and working towards a uniform set of rules and regulations to make it easier and seamless for our partners in tourism to function in our space. But I think that these are all lessons well learned, and I think all governments are, having had to work together during the pandemic, are now at a better place in terms of managing and coordinating regional efforts to ensuring that the industry is well supported. A challenge which was thrown up by the pandemic was that of supply chains. And how do we protect the industry and ensure that we are actually able to deliver continue to deliver a high-quality service to our guests and to the people who visit our shores. I think two things coincide here for me, speaking on behalf of Jamaica. One is we always lament in Jamaica that there needs to be greater linkages between the tourism sector and the rest of the economy, particularly agriculture. So if it's one thing that the pandemic would have made possible is for tourism operations to rely more on local supply. I think that is a lesson that the industry should not just learn for the pandemic, but should start to figure out how do we ensure that a certain target percentage of the inputs we need are locally secured. And I would say go one step further. How can the industry be the catalyst for the development of the local capacity to supply your needs? So I think it's in the interest of tourism to begin to think in this way. How do we ensure that we keep our supply chains safe? How do we build local redundancy so that we can continue to deliver a high-quality product? That moves me into the next point, which I think I'm just repeating what you all know, and that the future of tourism has to contemplate the issues of climate change, obviously, changes in weather patterns and sea level rise and so forth will affect travel patterns, which will affect tourism, which will affect your product. But there is also a changing in consumer consciousness, and that will affect consumer demand as more consumers incorporate not just monetary value in their consumption decision, but ethical values will begin to play an even greater part in their consumption patterns. So in addressing these huge issues of climate change and changing in ethical and social patterns of consumption, it may actually be a good thing to be able to say that huge tourism interests in local economies are actually building the capacity of the local economy in a more ethical way to provide the goods and services in the supply chain. So I think that general trend of the ethical consumer, but also the more socially conscious and climate conscious tourism interest in terms of operators, that going in that direction augurs well for the industry. I think in the short term, just moving to another subject, global travel, it's going to be another area of increased concern. We don't know where oil prices will end up, and that will have an impact not just on the cost of airfares, but it will have a general effect on incomes globally. Surprisingly, we have not yet seen the impact of this in Jamaica and in the region. We are running very close to pre-pandemic levels in terms of visitor arrivals. But if this continues for much longer, I'm sure there will be an effect akin to a recession. And so I think tourism industry players should start to prepare and think about this very, very carefully, particularly for the Caribbean, where 65% of our arrivals is by air. So we're very conscious of that, and we're seeing that as a possible threat. But just looking at the industry in general and the future of the industry, the diversification of the product is going to become very important from a competitive perspective, but also from a value perspective, the value of the industry and maintaining the value. So I have no doubt that mass tourism, sun, sea, and sand, will continue to be a main feature of the market. But experiential tourism, looking at culture and food and entertainment and environment, that these will also begin to play an even greater role. But I believe that for countries to protect the value of their tourism, need to develop policies that will incentivize tourism investors to seek to diversify their offerings. And I'm speaking now specifically for the Caribbean region, because when travelers think of the Caribbean region, they think all the countries in the region are the same, and the main feature, sun, sea, and sand. But Jamaica is trying to diversify to have, in addition to sun, sea, and sand, other offerings which may be low intensity, but higher value, with greater inclusion and diversity, greater use of locally generated inputs, and in particular, displaying local culture and involving the people more in tourism. And we believe that this will improve and increase the value of tourism to the country. So with these few thoughts that I'm sharing with you, I think I've reached my 10 minutes limit. I hope that it would have stimulated your own thoughts. And in closing, to reaffirm that I believe that we will have a strong recovery in tourism. People are traveling now more than ever after having been cooped up for 2 years. But there are risks. But I believe that the industry is strong enough, wise enough, intelligent enough, learning from the challenges to put in place the measures that will overcome those risks, make us more resilient, and ensure that we will have a robust and resilient and profitable tourism industry. Thank you.